everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to have a bit of a discussion about let's say controversy or some discourse that was happening about a month ago in the theatre community. So the tea is cold, but that's fine. We'll add some ice to it and call it iced tea. It'll be nice and refreshing. As you may remember, about a month ago, there was a lot of talk online on social media about a company that was looking for play submissions for a competition they were running, and apparently these plays had to be anti-woke. And obviously everyone was up in arms because gestures broadly at everything happening at the moment. It was a little bit scary and a little bit like the kind of far right tilt that seems to be happening is now invading kind of the arts and culture space, and that is not great for those of us who are not of that political bend. When this was first kind of popping off back in January, I knew that at some point I did want to talk about it, whether that was in a video or on my blog or some other way. Those are the two ways that I talk about things, so I don't know how else I would have talked about it. But it's right up my alley. Not only is it about theatre, but it's also about how theatre intersects with the wider culture, with society, with politics. Those are all things that I really care about. So I was like, yes, need to talk about this. A month later, I'm finally talking about it. So welcome, come on in. We've got jackets. We don't have jackets. I'll have to put the meme of join the club, we got jackets, otherwise that makes no sense. Like, this is what my brain does. I just randomly think of things. But I didn't just want to talk about literally what happened with that controversy. I also think there is a wider topic to be discussed here. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what the source of this controversy actually was. So who the company is that are doing this competition, what the competition is, what was said about wokeness, if anything, and my views on that. But then also broaden that out to what is a woke play, why are woke plays bad if they are, what makes them bad if they're bad, that kind of thing. Because I had a lot of thoughts, and I think all of them are quite important to have, actually, especially as theatre makers or as people who are very passionate about theatre. Even if you're in audiences, I think this is a really interesting discussion to have, especially at this time, because the world is on fire. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Show of the week today is going to be Trojan Women by Euripides. Firstly, I mention it as an example quite a few times in this video, so maybe if editing me wants to, we'll put a timer, not a timer, a counter for how many times I mention Trojan Women. So yeah, so that's number one. Secondly, as you will see as we get into like who this company doing this play is, it's kind of, you know, I imagine the Trojan Women is something that me and the owner of that company can both agree on is a good play. So there we go. See, it was a show that I was in during my training at RAM. I played Cassandra. And Cassandra gets done so dirty. I feel like we are all Cassandra. Anyone marginalised right now, if you're a woman or a femme, if you're trans, if you're a person of colour, if you're an indigenous person, we're all like, we told you this would happen and you ignored us. Like, we are all Cassandra right now. So that feels quite pertinent. So yeah, if you want to read a play about how war is terrible, I will leave links to things in the description. Let's get on to part one of this video. It's going to be fairly long, so, you know, put me on in the background, put me on at 2x speed, grab a beverage and get cozy, whatever you need to do whilst we have this chat together. Let's start off with the original controversy. As I was coming a little bit late to the party, like 30 days late to the party, I wanted to start off by going back to the source where all this started and find what company was actually running this competition. And the company that was running this competition is a company called Old Sovereign Publishing, which sounds like such a cool publishing company. In their own words, quote, Old Sovereign Publishing was created out of a desire to bring back beauty to the publishing industry and to empower literature through art. Looking through their website, they seem to be kind of idealistically conservative, but like, that's fine. You like leather covered books, you like kind of the old classics, that's cool. It's a niche. I'm not gonna take that away from you. Yeah, they seem pretty old school, which with a name like Old Sovereign Publishing, I wasn't really surprised. The competition in question, which I'm gonna butcher the name of this, like my CGCSE in ancient Greek ain't gonna help me with this, but we're gonna try. We're gonna try, okay? The competition itself is called the Great Panathenaea. Panathenaea? The Great Panathenaea? Mr. Saunders, if he's still alive, is crying. The Great Panathenaea. We're gonna go with the Great Panathenaea. In fact, we're not gonna say it again, so it doesn't matter. So anyway, this competition, I've got the details here, if you don't mind me reading, 2 secs. So this is a competition where participants need to submit a 1-act play based on an episode in Plutarch's Lives. There'll be 2 finalists. They get a $2,500 prize. They get a book contract with 10% of the royalties. They get their play performed on a London stage by the players of the base. I don't know who the base are. I loved this as a quote on the info page about the competition. Quote, "The winner will be acclaimed on the theatre floor by the entire audience of a large London stage and crowned with the laurels of victory," which later on there's talk about navel gazing, and I was just like, pot kettle. Like, what? Anyway, the important thing to note here that in the actual competition details and nowhere on the website, there's nothing about no woke plays or any mention of woke plays or being anti-woke as an ethos, which isn't surprising because, like, are you gonna say that publicly on your website? I don't think we're at that stage of this fascist hellscape. But from what the discourse was a month ago and what everyone was saying online, I was slightly surprised because it seemed everyone was talking about as if the no woke playness of the whole thing was very overt. So that's just something to mention. Like, it doesn't say in the actual competition, we don't want any woke plays, we just want whatever they would want. So, not finding mention of woke plays, I had to dig a little deeper. So I went to the stage. By the way, all of this stuff is going to be linked below if you want to check it out for yourself. But yes, I went to the stage, which, if you don't know what the stage is the industry newspaper in the UK, essentially. So yes, the stage did cover this, which was helpful for me. Sorry, we just needed a peppermint tea break. Oh. The stage covered this with an article titled "Playwriting Competition Launched to Counteract Overtly Political Theatre." Again, not specifically saying woke, but usually when people say overtly political, they mean, you know, things that are more left-leaning, and things that are more left-leaning tend to be labelled as woke. We're going to get onto that later on in the video. Before I get into what the stage article said, I just want to make it clear that the stage article was taking its source from a Telegraph article, which I think actually, from what I understand, actually had the interview with the guy who runs Old Sovereign Publishing. The director of Old Sovereign Publishing is a guy called George Carter. It seems that he did an interview with the Telegraph where he said all of the supposedly anti-woke, anti-politics stuff. The stage is reporting on what was said in that article. I couldn't access the Telegraph article because the Telegraph is behind a paywall and I'm not giving the Telegraph my money, sorry. The downside of that is I don't know how much editorializing the Telegraph did in their article that the stage is now referencing. So there's only so much we can know about what George Carter actually thinks and said, but the stage article does include some direct quotes from George Carter, so I still think it's useful. One of the direct quotes from Carter is, quote, "We are hoping to take back the stage from the agitprop and overtly political nature of most modern theatre and stage to a more serious form that is focused on the stage as a place to perform art." Another quote from the stage in general is, "The director called modern British theatre, quote, navel-gazing, and suggested that high-profile plays at subsidised venues would not be remembered in years to come." Those are just a couple of the quotes. I will leave the stage article down below if you want to read it in full. It's not behind a paywall, but you do need to like sign up to get 3 free articles a month. Having read the article, having looked at Old Sovereign Publishing's website, also their Instagram page, here's my response specifically to what Sovereign Publishing is doing with this competition and the opinions of the director, George Carter. To me, from what I can tell from reading the Stage article, it seems like George Carter is of the opinion that art and politics are mutually exclusive. Like, something can't be artistic and also political. It's one or the other. I disagree. Just put my cards on the table. I disagree with that. I fundamentally disagree with that, and I have so many bullet points to say why. Firstly, a lot of the classical literature that we still have surviving was political in its day, and some of that is still relevant now. And I've got a few examples. Georgie-boy, George Carter, if you're watching, I doubt you are, but if you are, here are some examples for you to prove why you're wrong. The first example that popped into my head straight away when thinking of counter examples to this idea that politics and art don't, like, there is not a Venn diagram for those two things, was The Crucible by Arthur Miller. If you don't know The Crucible, it is about the Salem witch trials, but it's not about the Salem witch trials. It's about McCarthyism in the US. Literally what it's about. Yeah, I'm gonna go with this, sorry. Another example that's an Arthur Miller play that I saw recently, All My Sons. I haven't got this written down, so this is just me spitballing off the top of my head, but that play is all about a guy who is making aeroplane parts for America during, I want to say World War II, a war. They don't mention which war it is. Those parts are faulty, people die. One guy takes the flak for it, the other guy doesn't, but he actually was the guy who caused this death of these 21 pilots who are the sons. It's all connected, baby! But yeah, so that's about the pressure of a government in wartime, political, and also the kind of politics and social kind of pressure of business over what is right, business over ethics, and especially when you've got the political pressure of a government who needs those parts now, and also the pressure of, you know, it's great for business if you've got a government contract during a war, because they're going to be a repeat customer and you don't want to lose that business. So, like, that's political, I would argue. So those are two more kind of modern examples. As we know, old sovereign publishing is more about the classics, so let's move on to Shakespeare. Maybe that's more up their street. The first Shakespeare I thought of is Macbeth. You might think, Michaela, Macbeth, Scotland, witches, how is that political? So many reasons. So, Macbeth, for context, was written in 1606. It's political for two reasons, in terms of, like, at its time it was political. Firstly, it was responding and referencing the increasing fear of witchcraft. Why is that related? King James, of King James Bible fame, he wrote a book called Demonology in 1597, which is all about how you catch witches and how they're terrible, and like, we've got to hunt down the witches are bad. It was published in 1597, but it was reprinted in 1603 when he became King James I of England. Which also links into the second reason it's political. England has a Scottish king now, because if you know your like Tudor to Stuart history, King James I of England is King James VI of Scotland. So he was already King of Scotland when he wrote Demonology, and it was published in 1597. He becomes King James I of England because Lizzie I dies and she doesn't have an heir, and then he republishes Demonology. 3 years later, we get Macbeth. Don't tell me that's not political. Don't tell me that's got nothing to do with the politics of this, like, the first Stuart king, you know? Like, come on. Some more specific examples of plays that were political in their time, in terms of what was happening at the time William Shakespeare was writing, are two of his histories. So we've got Richard III and Henry VII. These are pro-Tudor propaganda plays. Richard III was the last Plantagenet king. So in the succession of English kings, you've got Richard III, and then there's the Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard is defeated, you get Henry VII, who takes over the throne as the first Tudor king. Henry VII, dad of Henry VIII, dad of Elizabeth I. The play, Richard III, is how Richard III was the baddest king who ever did king. He murdered his nephews. He was a tyrant. He had like a twisted back and he looked like a beetle and he was awful and oh, he's just a bad, bad dude, and isn't it wonderful that he gets defeated in the end? Henry VII, I'll be honest, I don't know that play that well, but I imagine it's along the gist of, yay, the Tudors are great. Also, like, Henry VII is the guy who defeated Richard III. So, yeah. In Elizabethan England, which, looking back at Elizabeth's reign now, we think it's all sunshine and rainbows. It wasn't. There were times of bad harvests. There were, you know, we defeated the Spanish Armada and then she didn't pay the soldiers for, like, ages, and they were just, like, out at sea being like, can we please get paid and stop dying of, you know, not being home or like whatever diseases they had on ships. Like, it wasn't just like sunshine and rainbows. So it's useful to have some propaganda to be like, yeah, but the Tudors are great though. Remember how bad Richard III is? So please love me. Love Queen Liz. So yeah, that's political. If you're making propaganda plays, that is political. So yeah, so those are the examples of Shakespeare plays where it's specifically about the politics of the time, but also in general, there are plenty of Shakespeare plays that are just about politics generally, where politics is a theme. I have some examples here, you'll be pleased to know. So, all of the histories, just all of the histories are about the politics of which they were set. Macbeth we've already mentioned, but that's also, in terms of like about the world of the play, is all about politics, like killing a king so you can be king. It's pretty political back in the day. Julius Caesar, again, just like you murder a dude because you don't want him to become a king, and then political shenaniganery ensues. Antony and Cleopatra, similar vibe. Yes, it is the love story of Antony and Cleopatra, but also there's lots of politics thrown in there because she's the queen of Egypt and Antony's part of a triumvirate thing going on, you know. Here's a curveball that I want to make an argument for. You could argue that plays that seemingly aren't about politics have some politics in them. My example for this is A Midsummer Night's Dream. With A Midsummer Night's Dream, with the four lovers, Hermia wants to be with Lysander, but they can't be together, so they go to the king of Athens or the ruler of Athens, and he's basically like, you got to do what your dad says, you've got to marry Demetrius, you can't be with Lysander. And that is the whole inciting incident of the play, because that's when they're like, let's run into the woods and get married somewhere else. That's political. That's literally like them going to a political figure and being like, sort out my beef that I've got with my daughter wanting to marry this dude. Like, that's politics. Is it a main theme? I mean, it's not one of the main themes. You can argue there's also like the fairy politics, so you could argue it is a bigger theme than even I'm acknowledging. But even if you are like, okay, it's a minor theme or it's more of a plot point, there's still politics in there. They're not completely devoid of each other. Now, I don't know if Georgie-boy is going to be like, yeah, but that's an exception. We're talking about like the early modern period with that. Like, of course, it's going to be a bit of politics, but if you go back to the true classics, it's all about the art. Okay, I've got some Greek plays for you, Mr. Carter. Antigone by Sophocles. Antigone, if you don't know, she is the daughter of Oedipus complex fame. So Oedipus kills his dad, marries his mum, ends up gouging out his eyes. He has 4 kids with his mum. Antigone is one of those kids. Antigone's brother has been killed. The new ruler of wherever, is it Thebes? I don't know where it's at. I can't remember. I didn't make a note of it. I'm sorry. But the ruler is like, no, this son of Oedipus cannot have a proper burial. Antigone is like, screw this. It's the law of the gods and he's my brother. I'm going to give him a proper burial. Hijinks ensue. So Antigone is all about the law of the gods / personal grief ritual, kind of familial loyalty, versus the law of the state. That is political. Number 2, the Oresteia by Aeschylus. The Oresteia, if you don't know, is literally about the founding of the Greek legal system. This guy does some bad shit. He's getting chased by the Furies. He goes to Athena's temple and is like, Athena, come on, can we like not have me just mauled by the Furies? And she's like, okay, jury trials. A play about the foundation of the legal system, I would argue, is political in nature. If politics is like all of the highfalutin rhetoric and stuff, the law is how that politics is put into action, right? So yeah, it's political. My final classical Greek example is your favourite and mine, the Trojan Women, again by Euripides. So the Trojan Women is set right after the fall of Troy. So the Trojan horse has happened, all of the men are dead, the women are just like sitting around waiting to see who they're going to be sold into slavery to, crying about their lives. There's a baby gets thrown off the walls at one point. It's all very, very sad. Cassandra's screaming about how she's going to get murdered. Spoiler, she does get murdered, but that's in a different play. But essentially, the Trojan Women is all about the consequences of war on the conquered and powerless. The women have no power. They are conquered. This is what happens to them. This is really, really bad. That's political. How you treat the powerless and disenfranchised as a society is political. The argument that art and politics are mutually exclusive just doesn't wash with me. All of these plays in their times were political. We just don't see them as political now because we're so far removed from their cultural and political context. We can read them or watch them and be like, oh wow, how amazing it is, what artistry, it's so well written. We can see them that way, right? Because we're removed from the cultural context. And if you're not, either through how the production is set up or just your own inclination, if you're not putting those parallels together to see how any political points made in a play from that 2,000 years ago is relevant today, then you're just going to see it as art. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. But to say that then, like, they're mutually exclusive is just wrong and inaccurate. The second reason I disagree with Georgie Carter's whole premise is the choice of source material for this competition. This is just me and you, Georgie, me and you, right here. If you wanted to have submissions of plays that weren't political, if you don't like the political stuff, why did you choose Plutarch's Lives as the source material to adapt? I just want to know. I just want to know because it makes no fucking sense. It doesn't make sense. I'll be honest, I didn't know much about Plutarch or Plutarch's Lives before I was researching and writing the notes for this video. I'll admit it, but when I discovered what that was, I was just like, my guy, what the actual fuck? So, if you don't know who Plutarch is, basically he writes Plutarch's Lives as all of these biographies about famous people from Greece and Rome. Most of the biographies are like compare and contrast. So we'll take a Greek guy and then a Roman guy who are like kind of similar. And it's basically him being like, wow, these Greek guys were so great, just like our Roman guys right now. Look how great they both are, woo! Why do I think this is stupid if you don't want political plays? So firstly, it's the biographies of famous men. The whole premise is how the actions and personalities of these famous Greek and Roman men impacted stuff. Essentially, it's great man history, the curse of the Western world, great man history. Great man history as a concept in itself is a political concept. It's really easy to disenfranchise the majority of people if you teach everyone that like the only people who can make a difference are a few great people. Why do a lot of people feel apathetic about voting or from protesting or boycotting? It's the idea that we can't make a difference. That is rooted in great man history. It's like, I'm not a great person. I can't make a massive difference. Therefore, my actions don't matter. That is political. Point number one on this. Point number two, let's have a look at who these people are that he's talking about, right? So not only do we have Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, who I would assume most of you watching this video have heard of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, but we also have Cicero, a Roman statesman, Demosthenes, a Greek statesman. I'm gonna butcher this name. Artaxerxes, the King of Kings of the Achaemenid Empire. He's the King of Kings of the Achaemenid Empire. Aratus, Greek politician and military leader. Galba, Roman emperor. Otho, Roman emperor. I could go on. I'll link the Wikipedia article in the description. These are all political figures of their time. They are political figures. Therefore, Plutarch's Lives is political.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And you might say, you watching or Georgie might say, but Michaela, it's an adaptation. You don't have to be like, this is literally about Julius Caesar. You can adapt it in any way, shape and form you like. These men were political figures. Plutarch's Lives is all about how they wielded their political power, how their actions and their personalities made change in the world and in their lives. That is going to be imbued by the fact that they were political men, that they had political power and social power. Who has power is a political and a social concern, right? Political power is obviously political, it's political power, but even social power, you can get social power through gender, patriarchy, through race, white supremacy and imperialism and colonialism, class, through capitalism. I could go on, right? These are all political things. These are all social things. These are all cultural things of import that have a political bent. Even if a writer were to adapt Plutarch's Lives and, you know, set it in a domestic private setting or whatever it is, the men that this adaptation is based on, as in like the men in the original had power, their equivalents in whatever the adaptation is will have power, and that will be interpreted by some in the audience as political, whether it's intended or not. Even if you made, you know, the character that was in the original Julius Caesar like a trans female activist who also has a disability and is also like black, like even if you did all of that, that's still gonna be political because then you're just subverting what has traditionally been the case in some way. You either make Julius Caesar a cis-het rich white man and it's political because it's the status quo, or you subvert that and it's political because it's not because he was a powerful dude who did shit. And if you're adapting it for a play, he's still gonna be, or they, whatever your character ends up being, is gonna be a person who does shit. And even if you find a way where none of that is the case, like it's so far removed from the source material that if you knew nothing about Plutarch's Lives, you're not gonna get the parallel. Firstly, I don't think you're gonna win this competition, so you wasted your time. And secondly, most of the people who are going to see your play or buy your play from this publisher is gonna know that the context is that it's an adaptation of Plutarch's Lives, so they're gonna have that context, so they're gonna interpret it with that context, which is going to make it political. If you don't want political shit, why did you choose the most political of classical source materials? Please explain it to me, George Carter. It makes no fucking sense. Either you're an idiot or you're a hypocrite is where I'm at right now, because it makes no fucking sense. And breathe. So yeah, that's why I disagree with George Carter, specifically about this adaptation kind of competition thing that he's got going on. I don't know what the logical fallacy would be, but I think it is like a fallacy in his logic. He's just saying we don't want overtly political plays, blah 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 blah, and then he's gonna be like, yeah, but this politics is fine. Your reasoning does not make sense. Choosing Plutarch's Lives as the basis for your competition doesn't make sense. If that's truly what you believe, if you're like and like I might be wrong, I admit I might have interpreted his views wrongly. He might be like, politics is fine, I just don't want it rubbed in my face. We're going to get into that in a second. But even then, I do think there's a disconnect between saying that everything should be art and things are too political and asking people to adapt Plutarch's Lives. I think there's a logical disconnect there, and I think you should look to yourself. That's my opinion. But hey, I'm just a brown woman on the internet, what do I know? So let's move on, because I think that there is a wider discussion here. Because as I said, I suspect that deep down, Georgie-boy here doesn't mean what he says. I don't think he means there should be no politics in theatre. I think he means there's a certain type of politics that he doesn't want in theatre. So let's talk about woke plays. Before we talk about what a woke play is, I think it's going to be really important that we take a little bit of a deep dive into what woke is, because boy howdy, that is a word with so much baggage. So I think we need to break it down to be clear what we are talking about here. The idea of the metaphor of being awake, meaning being politically aware, socially aware, culturally aware, is actually earlier than a lot of people think. It's first documented in the US in the kind of Civil War era, and that was with the Wide Awakes youth organization. That's where we first see this idea documented of being awake, being politically conscious. Woke specifically, meaning the same thing, comes from 1930s America, particularly in the African American community, unsurprisingly, and it means having an awareness of racial discrimination and injustice. So again, kind of that similar political, social, cultural awareness idea. Related phrases are things like stay woke, which obviously means once you are aware, continue being aware, continue learning, etc. Obviously, in recent years, it has become a pejorative. So in the pejorative sense, there are kind of two definitions of woke. The first definition is to do with performative activism. So this is where we get related phrases like woke capitalism, woke washing, and also slacktivism. So the idea of like, oh, you're woke, you're kind of like pretending to be aware and doing kind of performative gestures in kind of liberation, but you're not actually. The other way that it's used as a pejorative is, and this is my personal definition, is anything the right don't like. If it's to do with gay rights, trans rights, rights for people of colour, rights for immigrants, rights for asylum seekers, rights for women, they don't like it, so it's woke. A kind of more academic, maybe rigorous definition from The Economist is following an intolerant or moralizing ideology. So the idea of like, you're wrong for not thinking these things or holding these values or wanting these people to be treated with respect, essentially. Related words in terms of this pejorative meaning of the word woke would be things like social justice warrior, snowflake, things like that. So we have these kind of three definitions of what wokeness is. There's the original definition, which is about social, political consciousness, the pejorative meaning of it being performative, and the third one being like, you're moralizing me, so I don't like that. With these definitions in mind, what would a woke play be? And in fact, I'm gonna just double check if anyone has made a definition of a woke play. I don't think anyone has.
A few moments later.
Yeah, no one has come up with a definition of a woke play. I think I know why, and I'm going to get there in a minute. So this is the definition that I came up with when I was trying to think of, if we're going to define a woke play, what would it be? The definition I came up with is a piece of literature written for stage performance that embodies or perpetuates woke ideology. The problem with this is that the definition of woke is so broad that it doesn't mean anything as an artistic category. Like, firstly, the fact that there are three definitions, so like, which version of woke in woke play do you mean? But it just doesn't work. To demonstrate this, I've got 6 examples here of existing things that could be defined as woke. And I've got 3 musicals and 3 plays, partly because I wanted to include musicals. Also, musicals I think are better known. Like, if I say a musical, you've probably heard of it. Whereas with plays, there are so many plays and not everyone has heard of every single play. So here are my examples. Les Mis is a woke play. Well, a woke musical. It's about the plight of the poor and fighting for social justice. That's woke. Six is a woke play. Six is about reclaiming the feminine narratives of a traditionally male-centered story, namely the 6 queens, the 6 wives of Henry VIII, taking back the narrative that they were just victims of his tyranny. That's woke. Wicked is a woke play. Wicked is about fighting for justice and equality for marginalised groups, namely the animals with a capital A, and comfort versus responsibility. Glinda chooses comfort. Elphaba chooses responsibility. Elphaba sacrifices prestige, fame, belonging, acceptance to do the right thing. That is woke, that is political. Here are 3 play examples, and I've gone with Greek plays just because I think they're pertinent to the fact that we're talking about Old Sovereign publishing. So the first example I've got is The Persians by Aeschylus. Also, fun fact about Persians is that it's the oldest surviving piece of Greek drama, so that's a little bit of a fun bit of trivia for you. The play The Persians is basically about the Persians, who were historically a huge enemy of the ancient Greeks. And most scholarship about the Persians agrees that it sympathizes with the Greeks' enemy, the Persians. It's not about the Persians being like, oh, look at them, they're terrible. It's sympathizing with them, showing them in a sympathetic light. That, to me, fits the definition of a woke play. Wokeness tends to be about, you know, standing up for the marginalized, the disenfranchised, etc. And that includes people that your culture doesn't like. I feel like an equivalent would be a play that shows asylum seekers on boats coming here illegally in a sympathetic light with the current, you know, immigration zeitgeist in the UK at the moment. That's kind of a similar idea of these people that we've demonized because in the case of the Persians, we're like literally fighting against them all the time. But actually, here is a play that humanizes them, that helps us empathize with them, to like sit in their shoes, to see the suffering that they're going through, right? That's woke as fuck. Example number 2, The Trojan Women. Hey girls, hey. It's sympathetic to these marginalized women who are being taken into sexual slavery. Kind of similar to the Persian thing. The Trojans were the enemies of the Greeks, but we are made to sympathize with these women and the horrible fate that is going to befall them. And we witness the cruelty of the Greeks in that. The final Greek example I've got is The Suppliant Women by Aeschylus. So if you don't know The Suppliant Women, because I didn't, basically these women are fleeing forced marriage to their Egyptian cousins. I don't know if it's like their actual cousins or if it's like a more of a kinship situation of like, you're on our side, and they just don't want to marry these dudes. Anyway, they flee from Egypt, they get to Argos, they go into this temple or this sanctuary, and they entreat the king of Argos to like protect them from being married to these Egyptian dudes. And at the end of the play, the king of Argos is like, you shall not marry these women, when the Greeks are like, hey, can we have our wives to be back? And he's like, no. It's about choosing moral right over political advantage. Basically, the king of Argos has to be like, either I help these women and potentially start a war with Egypt, or I send these women to be married to these men they don't want to marry, and you know, that's not right. Also, I think there might be a little bit of like threat of wrath to the gods because they have gone to these like temple sanctuaries of the gods. So it's kind of like, ugh. But yeah, it's moral right over political advantage, essentially. That's political, that's woke. So from what I can tell, based on kind of my own logical conclusion of what a woke play even is, any play that shows a marginalized community, either at the time the play was written or us looking at it today, we would identify a group that is marginalized within our own society. That play would arguably be a woke play. And that's a lot of plays. That's a lot of plays. Therefore, a woke play can't really be a thing if everything or almost everything can be put into a category. Is it a category? Do you know what I mean? My opinion, and this is just like my opinion, my speculation, I think what Georgie-boy, George Carter, means when he says overly political plays is, I think he means a play where the political agenda is at the forefront. All of the plays that I've mentioned, there's other shizzle going on, right? It's not just about the politics. Like, you have Marius being a wet blanket, you have killer pop songs, you have, you know, you have some sisterhood going on in there, you have a love triangle. Guess whether I'm talking about the Greek plays or the musicals. You know, there's other things happening. Even if this is his take, I still think he's hypocritical because, and again, this is my speculation, I doubt George Carter would be dismissive of the Trojan women, for example. I don't think if you showed him The Trojan Women by Euripides, like, do you like this or not? I think he'd be like, yes, a huge contribution to Western literature, a huge artistic achievement of the Greco-Roman world. We love the Trojan women is bae. Probably wouldn't be his words, but you know what I mean. The thing is, if you know the Trojan women, if that isn't beating you over the head with the message, like, I don't know what is. Like, it's literally the women being like, our lives are shit, our husbands are dead, we're going into slavery, everything's awful. And then every so often you get a Greek dude being like, wow, you guys are really depressed and sad, aren't you? And they're like, yes, please tell us something good. And they're like, alas, it's gonna get shitter, ladies. Like, it's literally that. Like, it's good, don't let me put you off, but like, there's not a lot else happening. It's just them being like, our lives are awful. And then occasionally one major player will come in being like, oh, woe is me. Okay, I'm going to my new, like, sex slave husband, bye. Oh, woe is me. I'm going to my new sex slave husband, bye. It's literally... I shouldn't laugh, it's very terrible in terms of, like, for the women it's terrible, for the characters it's terrible. I really feel like at some point I should just do a speed run of like 1-sentence synopses of different plays. I think that would be fun. I think that would be fun for me. Hopefully it would be entertaining for you. Let me know if you want it. Now I've got that off my chest, let me just take a moment to play devil's advocate, because I think Georgie C has probably had the experience that I think we have all had at some point. I think we all know or can think of, like, those plays. Maybe it's just that one play where they put their message over any other purpose that a play can have. And you're just sitting there being like, okay, we get it. Like, shooting puppies is evil. Like, why are we talking about this? So let's discuss that side of the coin, because I think that is also important for us to dissect. Hello! Funny story. This part of the video got corrupted, which is kind of annoying. So here I am on a Tuesday night. I've literally just got in from work after a roller coaster of a day, because that's what Tuesdays are in my life now, to refilm this section of the video. I've got a peppermint tea because I'm feeling a bit sick from comfort eating on the train home, so... And I've literally just poured it, so it's too hot. I don't know why I tried to do a victory sip. That was stupid. Let's just jump back into what makes woke plays bad. I don't know where I left off in the last clip. I filmed that days ago. I can't remember. So yeah, I don't know where I first heard it, but it's a very useful maxim, I think is probably the right word, that the first job of a play is to entertain, or the first job of theatre is to entertain. Funnily enough, for the writing course that I read for as an actor that I did today, me and one of the writers were having this exact conversation very briefly about Tom Stoppard's play Arcadia, and how the writer in question felt that it was very kind of like this them waxing philosophical, and it's like, then why make it a play? It's exactly this thing. If all you want to do is to give your audience information or discuss ideas, etc, etc, there are other ways to do that that are not through the medium of a play. Like, you could give a lecture, you could write an essay, you could write a video essay, you could write an article. If you're choosing to write a play, you have other things at your disposal to make that an entertaining experience for your audience, right? You have different characters, you have a shared space with your audience, which you wouldn't get with like a video essay or a written essay or a documentary, for example. You have the use of suspension of disbelief because you're storytelling, so that's a very useful tool. You have the use of lighting, sound, movement, etc., kind of theatrical devices in order to convey your message in an entertaining way. I think the big thing that you have with a play, though, is that you can have different voices. Obviously, you can have monologue, which I think all of the mediums have access to monologue, but you also have duologue, you can have dialogue. Essentially, you can have different voices. So what you get through using a play to put across your message to an audience as opposed to any other more kind of non-fiction medium, is that you can have characters embody the different viewpoints, the different arguments, the different values of people. For example, going back to the Trojan women, yes, we hear from all of the women make up the Greek chorus in the play, and we obviously hear about all of the different important women of Troy, Queen Hecuba, Cassandra, Andromache, I'm pretty sure it's Andromache, but we also hear the viewpoint of the Greeks through the few male Greek characters. I think it might just be one male Greek character actually that comes in periodically to tell the women how terrible their lives are. It's like, oh, something else is happening. But we get the Greeks' viewpoint through that soldier character. You could also argue, well, it's not an argument, it's true, we also get the male perspective through that one male Greek soldier because all the Trojan men are dead. And you could also argue we get a slightly different Greek point of view through Helen. Because we hear from Helen of Troy, Helen is Greek, she got kidnapped by Paris. There was a whole thing about an apple and being like, who's the pretty god? And then all of the goddesses were just like, oh, we're just gonna like fall for this thing and then just start a 10-year war. Why? Okay, that's a story for another video. But yeah, so we hear different viewpoints, is my point. This might be a bit rambly, I'm really sorry. This is like the only time I have to film this. So you're getting rambly 9:17 at night, just home from work me. So there we go. So yeah, so you can have different characters voicing opposing views about whatever it is you want to explore in your play, whatever woke topic you want to talk about. The thing is that less experienced or less skilled writers might not be very good at using this resource, which is understandable. Like, everyone has to learn. Like, I'm pretty sure if I were to try and write a political leaning play with lots of different voices, like, my first attempt would not be very good too. So this is no judgment, it's just the way it is. It's a skill that you need to learn, being able to write these different characters with these different voices effectively. Especially if it's something with a more political bent, it might be that the playwright is so kind of stuck in their own point of view that any characters they write that have a dissenting view, or are supposed to, like, their function in the play is to have a dissenting view, can come across as less authentic. On the one hand, you could have characters where their dissenting views aren't really dissenting, they're just like giving slightly different angles, but they all kind of agree. So for example, I'm just going to use the shooting puppies example just because it's just a really obvious one. Like, I think we can all agree shooting puppies is bad. If your play is about how shooting puppies is bad, you can have lots of different characters being like, one character goes, shooting puppies is bad because, you know, animal rights, and another person is like, shooting puppies is bad because they're so fluffy, and another person's like, no, shooting puppies is bad because guns are bad. Like, they all disagree on why shooting puppies are bad, but they all essentially agree, so you have a really weak conflict, which is just not interesting or entertaining for your audience. The other thing that can happen with less skilled or less experienced writers is that the characters that are meant to be giving an opposing or a counter view to your main ethos of your play can come across as pantomime villains. So for example, in the Shooting Puppies is Bad play, you have like the characters that we're meant to be rooting for saying shooting puppies is bad, and they're really nice. They have no character flaws, they are just like perfect humans and we love them, and they're always lovely and they're always nice. And then the character who's the voice of shooting puppies is good, I guess Corella DeVille, is like so evil. Like, they don't only want to shoot puppies, they also like, I don't know, drown kittens and litter, and you know, they just do all of the bad things. They're also like a really abusive person to other people in their lives. You know, they're really horrible to everyone around them. They're rude, they're inconsiderate. You know, there is no redeeming feature about the character with the dissenting voice, and there is no kind of character flaws in the characters that are voicing the opinion that the playwright agrees with and wants you, the audience, to agree with too. You get two-dimensional protagonists and you get two-dimensional antagonists, which again is really, really boring. Like, audiences don't want to be coddled. They don't want to be told what to think. They want to be given a story, given a narrative, immersed in a world, but be allowed to form their own conclusions. And yes, you as a writer can steer that to a certain extent, but when it's like color by numbers, like really, really obvious and plain and basic with no nuance, that's really, really boring for an audience. So what you can end up with is really weak characters, either weak because they are 2D, really obvious, no nuance whatsoever, or really boring because there is no conflict between these characters really. Which leads to boring conflict. Either of them involve boring conflict. And it's not entertaining. And also you kind of end up hurting your message as well, because again, you're trying to spoon feed the message to the audience and the audience aren't going to take it on that well. An audience is much more likely to be convinced if they feel like they've come to their own conclusion. So more skilled writers are going to write political plays that don't feel like a PSA, that don't feel like they're bashing you over the head with the message, because they're able to write compelling characters and you as the audience are drawn into that world that the playwright has created and, you know, actively are able to engage with your argument and come to their own conclusions. Even if individual audience members don't come away agreeing with your point of view, you've given them something that is interesting to watch, that is compelling to watch, and they can see these different arguments play out and they can think about, you know, their own relationship to those things, rather than you telling them what to do by making the bad guys really bad and the good guys really good, and then you're just like, as an audience member, okay, well, I know that, or I don't agree with that, what else is there? Now, obviously, you can still write a political play really well, and some people will still hate it and think it's a woke play and that's not your fault necessarily, because it might just be that their worldview is so fragile and so narrow that anything that threatens it is they can't handle. That's not your problem as an artist and a playwright, and that's fine. But I think most of the time when people are like, oh my gosh, it's just a woke play, it's bashing you over the head, blah, 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 part of the problem could be that the playwright in question isn't skilled enough, hasn't built up the skill to be able to write a play in a nuanced way that explores these political themes that they care really deeply about and they may have a really strong opinion about. They don't know how to show the other side of that coin. But I do think there's another side to this, because as theatre artists, writers, directors, etc., we can subvert the idea of entertainment that it has to be naturalistic, that characters have to be nuanced and complex, and that entertainment should be at the forefront of what we're doing when we're engaging with our audience. And this is where I want to talk about Brecht. Now, I just want to caveat before anyone comes for me that I don't think Georgie-boy, George Carter, is talking about Brecht when he talks about political plays. I don't think, this is my speculation, I don't think George would like Bertolt Brecht's work. I don't think he would be a fan. And also, with what I'm about to discuss, Brecht is kind of an extreme example of this. So I also am not saying you either have to do completely naturalistic or be Brecht, or emulate Brecht, I should say. But I want to use Brecht as an example just because it's a really clear example and it's one that you can go away and explore for yourselves and you'll see what I mean. If you don't know who Bertolt Brecht is, Bertolt Brecht was a German theatre maker, theatre practitioner, and he invented this style of theatre called epic theatre, which he later kind of changed the name to dialectical theatre, which kind of gives you a clue as to what epic theatre / dialectical theatre is about. So Brecht's whole thing was to make the social, cultural and political commentary of his work overt. And he did this in many different ways. So one of the big things he did away with the whole idea of the suspension of disbelief. You see the actors changing costume on stage. You see all of the workings of the set of the theatre. Like, you don't have wings, you see all of the mechanics of what's happening. In terms of the relationship of actor to character, it's not that kind of method idea of like the actor becomes the character and there isn't any separation. It's like the actor is putting on a coat that is the character, so the audience is aware of that separation. There's no fourth wall, things like that. The point of Brecht's work is to hit you over the head with the message. It's not about being artistic. That doesn't mean that, you know, there isn't skill and artistry in there, but it's not like if you were to watch a really stylistic piece of theatre, people might talk about how the actor really embodied the character in their physicality or their mannerisms, or just like in their just essence and sense of being. You would talk about the set and it being really evocative or really naturalistic and really detailed. You would talk about the lighting really transporting you to a different world, or, you know, whatever it is. It's all about the emotions or the effect that these things create in order to transport the audience. With epic theatre, it is all about, is it serving the political message that I want the audience to get, right? So the example of this that I want to use specifically is The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui. So this is a Brecht play. It's going to the RSC later this year. It was also put on at the Donmar Warehouse a few years ago as well. So if you're in the UK and you fancy going up to the RSC and seeing it, then like check it out and you can see what I mean, literally. But yes, so The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui is set in Chicago around kind of these faux mafia gangs. The actual kind of rackets that these gangs are running is to do with cabbage. That's another way that Brecht subverts the idea of suspension of disbelief, is by making things really ridiculous and absurd and over the top. So the setting is mafia gangs in Chicago, but what the play is actually about is the rise of Adolf Hitler in pre-World War II Germany. And the action of the play directly mirrors the historical events that happened in pre-World War II Germany in the run-up to, I think it's like just after the annexation of Austria, because the annexation of Austria happens in the play. And to demonstrate how overt Brecht is in his work, and this is something that he does in many of his plays, I won't say all of them because I don't know, I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure in basically all of his plays he'll have a version of this. But in the script of Arturo Ui, there are sections where there'll be like projection or a plaque or some kind of text made visible to the audience, where the text tells the audience literally the German historical equivalent of the scene they have just watched. So the scene that is, I'm trying to think. There was like a big fight. I'm not massively up on my pre-World War II German history, so like, forgive me, but I think from reading the play, there's a massive fire that happens on the cabbage docks, and then there's text being like, this date there was this massive fire at this place. I think it was like a riot that happened, and that's when Hindenburg like devolved loads of power to Hitler. I think that's what happened. I'm not a World War II historian, y'all. I don't know. But similarly, there's another section where you see the annexation of Austria. It's basically this other town that isn't Chicago, the people who run like their cabbage racket get brought into the fold, and then you have the surtitle being like, this date, the annexation of Austria, blah, blah, blah. So the audience is in no doubt of what the political meaning of everything that they're watching is. Like, what it's an allegory for, what it is depicting, all of that good stuff. So the question is this lack of artistry and this overt political agenda bad? And I would argue no. And the reason I'd argue no is because it is intentional. The artist is intending to make the play overtly political and to bash you over the head with the message. It's meant to be uncomfortable and arresting for the audience. It's not meant to transport them to this other world. It's not meant to suspend their disbelief. It can still be entertaining. For example, the fact that in the case of Arturo Ui, it's all about like cabbage rackets. That's quite funny. Brecht uses humour quite a lot, and the subversion of that humour. Brecht uses song a lot in his plays and his theatre, so, you know, having a song and dance is always entertaining, but it's not entertaining in that way of like you feel utterly transported for however long, and then you come out of it and you're like, wow, I felt like I was in another land. And like, sure, subjectively, you may not like it. You may think it's bad because subjectively you do not enjoy that type of theatre. That is not what you go to the theatre for. But it's not objectively bad. It's not a lack of skill. I think the visual art equivalent of this is something like Picasso. He has that famous quote where he said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but it took me a lifetime to paint as a child, or like a child." It's all about what is the artist trying to convey and how are they doing that, right? It's not that Brecht couldn't act or couldn't write like a naturalistic play necessarily. He just wasn't interested in those things. As an artist, that's not what he wanted to do with his art, so he did something else. How does this relate to woke plays, apart from the fact that like Brecht is woke as fuck? If not now, like I don't know if any of his stuff is like problematic now, but definitely at the time, Brecht was woke as fuck. The way this relates to woke plays is that a woke play can bash you over the head with its message if that is the intent of the artist, and if it does so, it is valid. Like, you may hate on woke plays as much as possible and be like, oh, they're just so like navel gazing and they're so just like concentrating on their message and it's nothing to do with the artistry, blah, 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 blah. If that's the intent of the playwright or the intent of the, you know, devising group or the intent of the director, that is valid. You don't have to like it, but it doesn't make it bad. And you calling it navel gazing, okay, that's your opinion of that work. How do you know the difference between a play that is deliberately bashing you over the head because that's the intent and a play that's just badly written? That's kind of beyond the scope of this video, to be honest. I think if you're just like your average punter, you may not know. And in the end of the day, you could argue that it doesn't really matter, because what matters is what you as an audience come away from a piece of work with. At that point, I guess what I will say on that point is the more experience you have kind of working in theatre or watching theatre, getting well versed in theatre as a medium of expression, you can kind of, I guess, have little tells that indicate whether a play is trying to fall in one or the other. I think that you can tell the difference between a play that's attempting something and falling flat and a play that is subverting something, right? There's a level of commitment, a level of specificity maybe as well, a deliberateness to, I know that this is technically not correct, but I'm doing it anyway to make a point, versus I've just failed at doing something correctly. Do you know what I mean? I think there, like, the more versed you are in an art form, the more you can see that distinction. But yeah, ultimately, at the point where something is on stage for public consumption, whether a play being, let's say, blunt with its message is a mistake of the writer and their lack of skill, or a deliberate device, doesn't matter, because it's like, well, this is what we've done, and then audience, what do you think? And that's the beautiful thing about theatre, is that it's a dialogue between the theatre makers and the audience. So that's pretty cool, I think. All this to say is that, yeah, maybe a bad woke play isn't bad. Maybe it's just a playwright being like, yeah, I want to make a political point, so what are you gonna do? You bought a ticket, let's have a chat. Do you know what I mean? Back to Past Me for the conclusion. Hey! And if this corrupts, I'm gonna be so fucking pissed. So pissed. We're nearly there, guys. You're hanging in. Has your tea gone cold? To conclude about this whole thing, firstly, when it comes to George Carter, Old Sovereign publishing, publishing, publications, publishing, Old Sovereign Publishing. If my interpretation of the Stage article is accurate, and again, just to reiterate what I said 84 years ago, I don't know if it's accurate because I wasn't able to read the original article. I don't know this man. You don't know this man, etc. That's another political play, Parade. Parade is political AF. It touches on racism in the South. Obviously, it's about anti-Semitism in the South, lynching, like media spin. Such a woke show. Anyway, but yeah, if my interpretation is accurate, I fundamentally disagree with George Tata. I don't think we'd get on. I think, you know when people are like, who would you love to go to the pub and have a drink with? Like, he's at the bottom of my list behind maybe Satan. I do not think we would have a lot to say to each other. Yeah, I don't think we'd get on in a discussion about theatre or art either. I think as artists or people who appreciate the arts, I think we're probably diametrically opposed in our opinion there. I think I would probably disagree with his politics as well. I think anyone who's like, we should go back to the art and like everything's overtly political and none of these new plays will ever be remembered in hundreds of years' time, and it's like, mate, firstly, how do you know? Secondly, who are you to judge? Thirdly, a lot of the stuff that survived, especially when it comes to the Greek plays, some of that is just the survival of time. Like, a lot of shit gets lost to time because libraries burn down. It gets to a point where hundreds and thousands of years down the line, it's like, what has literally survived? There was one copy of this thing and the place where it was being kept got burnt down or flooded, or a monk decided to write some other shit over it. Things get lost to time regardless of their artistic merit. So like, what the fuck, dude? If you like Plutarch's Lives and you want to have a go at adapting it, then like, fair enough. I'm actually quite tempted to do it for myself as a writing exercise, not enter the competition. I have no interest in entering the competition, but like, just to be like, okay, how would I adapt this? That's all I've got to say on that. Like, if you want to enter the competition, like, enter the competition, be political and stick it to him and be like, this is my play about all of the political shit that happened in Plutarch's Lives. My second conclusion, when it comes to what people term as woke plays, in a pejorative, if they're using woke as a pejorative, what I think most people are actually talking about are probably just badly written plays, woke or not. Or they were triggered, but I think it's probably badly written plays. I think the reason that people put it down to wokeness is probably because, by and large, theatre tends to talk about themes that are seen as woke by the right more, because that's where conflict lies. Like, even if you want to talk about something so patriarchal, heteronormative, white, cis, hetty, or whatever it is, or like ableist, whatever it is, in order to have conflict, you need an antithesis to that worldview, right? And so the nature of that alone, I feel like a lot of people who are very, very right-wing in their views aren't interested in making theatre like that, because in order to make good theatre, you inherently have to engage with the other side. And I'm not saying all people with more conservative views or values like ignore the other side of the argument. That would be really, really reductive. But when we're talking about the ultra right, the far right, they don't want to engage with that, and so they're not going to be drawn to writing plays, I don't think. To have a play, you need conflict and drama, and to have conflict and drama, you need to have opposition. Some of that opposition is going to come from people having a different view, like your characters having a different view. That's why I think like bad plays can kind of be woke plays by default, just because it's people writing about things that affect people's lives, and politics affects people's lives, and you know, they're interested in having that discussion. And so they're going to write a play about it rather than, you know, get on some kind of right-wing podcast or something. The other thing that I will say about most woke plays being, when people say like a woke play in a pejorative, and it might just be a badly written play, is that writers are allowed to learn their craft. And it's up to writers to decide when they're going to be learning their craft in a public setting, you know? You can only just write plays for yourself in a vacuum with no audience for so long. At some point you have to put it in front of an audience, and like, playwrights are allowed to be learning. They're allowed to be improving their skills. They're allowed to write bad plays because that's part of that process. So I do think it's another thing if you have like an established playwright who like knows their craft and know what they're doing. If they write a bad play, then like, fair enough, like we all make mistakes, but like, yeah, then you can be like, look, this is like badly written, what are you doing? You're just like bashing us over the head with your message. But like, people are allowed to write bad plays. Like if you write a bad play and perform it in public, like, be prepared to face the criticism for the bad play, but like, it's also allowed. It's fine, you know. Next conclusion, yeah, it's basically the Brecht thing. Playwrights are allowed to bash you over the head with their message if they want, and you're allowed to not like it. That's okay. They're the artist. They can choose what they want their art to be, and if, you know, they have completed their mission successfully, more power to them, I guess. Also, this was a thought I had a couple of days ago as I was reviewing this and getting ready to film, is that part of me started to wonder if this whole thing wasn't for publicity. Again, I don't know what was said in the Telegraph article. Maybe George Carter was a lot more measured. From the quotes that I do have access to, I don't think so. But also, you know, the Telegraph is nicknamed the Tory Graph for a reason. It is a right-wing newspaper. Not populist right-wing, but it is a conservative newspaper. And so, you know, it could also be that editorially it was written in a way that, you know, pandered to that more conservative right-wing audience that the Telegraph has. And so it might just be that because of that, because it was in the Telegraph, because whoever wrote the original article was like hamming up the conservativeness of it, things got blown out of proportion. It might also be that George Carter generally holds these views. The only reason that they're not as over on his website is because he's a businessman and he knows that that's probably not going to go over well, especially when he has an artistic business. And like, not everyone who works in the arts is more left wing, but like, it does skew that way. And so, you know, he's not going to be like, I hate wokeness and equality and, you know, treating people with respect and no. So yeah, so it might not be for publicity. But then I'm also like, I'd never heard of this company before this all popped off. Whether it was for publicity or not, I think it may have worked. I think, I don't know how well, I don't know how many people were willing to go through this deep dive with, like I did, but like, I'd never heard of these people before last month. So part of me wonders if it was strategic to some extent, because they could have just been like, we're putting this out here and like put it on their own socials or whatever, or they could have gone to multiple outlets to say, we are doing this thing. They went to the Telegraph to do like an interview piece where they specifically talked about theatre is too political, we want to take it back to the art, blah 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 blah. Yes, that fits with their brand as a company, but also like, it's a theatre competition. You could have gone directly to the stage, you could have gone to the Guardian, you could, like, there are so many other news outlets you could have gone to and you didn't. So that's why I'm like, I wonder if this was also strategic, which, like, more power to you, I guess. Like, I can't knock the hustle. Oh, 2 hours later and we have reached the end of this video. Editing me, I pray for you, I give you love and good vibes. But yeah, let's do the outro. Boop. So that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed and that you, I don't know, just man, I'm so tired, y'all. I can't even. I don't want to go to work tomorrow. Oh, lordy loo. I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive with me about wokeness and theatre, and there were a few mini rants in there that I wasn't expecting to come out, so I hope those were entertaining. Let me know if you had any thoughts about this competition and the discourse, or the idea of woke plays or not. Are you a fan? Are you not? Do you have any opinions? Let me know. Also, check out my website. I do have a blog on there. I'm getting back to writing on there regularly. I recently wrote a blog post about Lent, as it is currently Lent. I am not Christian or religious, but I am observing some of the things in this terrible time when there's a lot of suffering. So yeah, if you want to read my thoughts about it, check it out. Stay tuned for more theatre content from a UK perspective, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye, friends!